Hello. Welcome everybody to this joint seminar between the Palestine Exploration Fund, PEF, Council for British Research in the Levant, CBRL, and UCL Press. My name is Carol Palmer, and I'm the director of CBRL, speaking to you from Amman, Jordan. It's a great pleasure to have you all with us this afternoon or this evening or this morning, wherever you are. I think we've got quite a broad geographic coverage today in all the members who are here with us. Today, we're delving into the history of archaeology, specifically the archaeologist Olga Tufnell, for the book launch of Olga Tufnell's Perfect Journey, published by UCL Press, edited by and introduced by Jack Green and Ros Henry, who are with us here today to give the presentation and speak to questions. I'm also delighted that co-hosting, co-chairing is Felicity Cobbing, Chief Executive and Curator from the PEF, actually sitting in the PEF offices today, and also to welcome Amara Thornton, who is founder and coordinator of the History of Archaeology Network at the UCL Institute of Archaeology and author of Archeologists in Print. So the running order today is I'm introducing, and I'll be giving some housekeeping notes shortly. And I will then hand over to my colleague at the PEF, Felicity, to give a little bit of background on the Olga Tufnell archive collection that is held at the PEF and a bit of its history and how it came to them. And then Amara Thornton is going to set the scene for us about the archaeologists of the time and some of her work as well in the UCL archives. And then we'll hand over to Jack Green, who will give the main presentation today for around 30 minutes. And then we'll open up for questions, starting with some questions from Amara and Felicity. I think all of you know our organizations, or many of you know our organizations very well. CBRL is one of the British Academies, British International Research Institutes. We have an office at the British Academy, and we have two institutes in the region, one in Amman and one in Jerusalem. Please look us up if you don't know us already on our website for more information. And please also look up the PEF on their website for more information on them, and I'm sure Felicity will provide some more information now. In terms of housekeeping, we're managing this through questions today through the chat. We're not using, some of you may be familiar with the Q&A function normally in webinars, but today we're going to use the chat for communication. If you'd like to introduce yourself, I'm aware that we as panelists can see who's here, but if you'd like to introduce yourself, please do say hello in the chat. And later on, please do feel free. We very much encourage you to put your questions also in the chat. But if you have a question, please could you mark it with a Q before, so that we know that you have a question, and we will try to answer in the time we have available as many questions as possible. Please try to be short with your questions and to the point, and we hope we'll have a very good discussion with both Jack and Ros Henry, who's with us as well, and our discussants here today. So I'm going to hand over now to Felicity at the PEF to do the introductions from the PEF side. So thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name's Felicity, and I'm the Chief Executive and Curator at the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. And Olga Tufnell had a very long association with the PEF, which lasted for decades. She joined our committee in 1942 and was still serving on the committee when she died in 1985. So I don't think she's the longest serving member of the committee in our history, but she's certainly up there with the top 3 people, I reckon. Right from the beginning of her association with the PEF, she was really a champion of the archives and the collections that we have. She recognized the value of the material for study, for teaching, for research. And she was ahead of her time in many ways. She was a particular champion, for example, of our casts collection, which a lot of people don't necessarily consider very important, but they're very, very useful as accessible copies of material which may otherwise be out of reach of many researchers for whatever reason that may be. So she was a very perceptive person, I think. And she lent her skill, her intelligence and her dedication to the PEF in many different ways. I get the feeling, having read the minute books, that she had her finger in all sorts of pies. Her influence was very widely spread on the committee and was very beneficial to the committee. But in particular, her main contribution to the PEF was in organizing our centenary exhibition in 1965, which was held at the V&A in London, very prestigious venue, and which ran from October to the end of December in 1965. This was our centenary exhibition, and it was entitled The World of the Bible. And it came with a catalogue, I don't know if you can see that there, which lists the objects, etc., that were in the exhibition. And it loaned objects from lots and lots of different organizations, from the British Museum, from the Ashmolean, the Bodleian Library, the Wellcome Historical Medical Museum, the Queen's Library, the BM's Department of Manuscripts as well. So a really kind of holistic look at the work that the PEF and others had done in the region over the last 100 years since our foundation in 1865. When the V&A run closed, the exhibition was kind of transformed with the assistance of the British Council into a travelling exhibition that first of all went to the Middle East, and it was made up of panels, information panels, photographs, and so on and so forth. And it travelled all around. It went to the American University in Beirut and to the National Museum in Damascus, to Amman, and even to Baghdad. And it was a huge success. And in this form, it was entitled 100 Years of Exploration and Archaeology. And then it came back to the UK, and it did the rounds here as well, all over the place, everywhere from Edinburgh down to Southampton, to Bristol, to Bolton, to Middlesbrough twice. So lots of keen, enthusiastic people in Middlesbrough. And it was a really, really big success and got the PEF many, many more members than actually the V&A run itself had done. So she was an extremely dedicated, hardworking and energetic person with lots and lots of practical application for her skills as well. When she died in 1985, a Tufnell Fund was established by the PEF, which went on to fund traveling students so that they could come and kind of do a piece of work in the Middle East for a short period of time. And this person was designated the Tufnell Scholar. And this money basically lasted until about the late 1990s. So it wasn't not an inconsiderable sum of money. And of course, the last thing that happened when she died is that her collection of personal papers and records and photographs were deposited at the Palestine Exploration Fund. And it's a huge archive. It covers her almost her entire life, from when she was a young girl right through to her death. It was first organised by Heather Bell, who was then the librarian of the PEF, and then over a period of almost, well, a year and a half really, by our honorary secretary, John McDermott. And if anyone knows the letters intimately for the whole of her time, then it's John, definitely. So he spent, yes, as I say, about a year and a half cataloguing them and making them available for research, so that people like Jack can delve into the archives and source the material so much more easily.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me to be a discussant today. Just by way of introduction, I did my PhD on British archaeologists working in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. And among them, you know, many people who would have been known to Olga Tufnell. And in fact, when I was flipping through the book yesterday, I just happened across a reference to Olga Tufnell meeting Agnes Conway, who was one of the key people in my PhD in Athens after she and her husband had left Jordan. So it was very nice to see if you like, a familiar face in Olga Tufnell's letters. But my first really intensive introduction to Olga Tufnell wasn't through documents, but actually through film. In 2014, I and a number of colleagues in the Institute of Archaeology, the Department of English, and the Department of Information Studies at UCL began a project to digitize and research some home movies that belonged to the archaeologist Gerald Lancaster Harding, who was one of Olga Tufnell's close and long-standing archaeological colleagues and friends. Indeed, in her letter of the 14th of November 1930, which is in the book, Olga recorded that H. Harding has a very fine cine Kodak. So you may look forward to seeing some funny pictures when we come back. At 4 daily, I sally forth with various bottles and dose the whole work. He took me doing it the other day. In fact, every incident of the day will get done in time. And it was very nice that we were able to marry up this quotation from Olga Tufnell's letter with a short film, which we had numbered LH3, where we see Olga dispensing her mysterious liquid out of a very large dark bottle. I have no idea what the liquid was, but she's there dispensing it nonetheless. In another letter dated the 30th of November, Olga discusses how the films became part of on-site entertainment. So she says, the cines have come out beautifully. S and H have invented a magic lantern out of a biscuit box, too professional to show the pictures. They enlarge to a foot across and show up well. What we want is a projector. I think that they probably got a projector at some point, because there are lots of films that Harding made, and even films that were made by Cathay, the film company. So it was a bit like sort of Blockbuster, if you like, an equivalent. But anyway, Harding's home movies sit alongside the formal excavation film, which was entitled Lachish, City of Judah, the work of photographer Ralph Richmond Brown, who is another key figure in the letters. And this film we also digitized as part of the project. Both of the films give us a unique and moving, in more senses than one, insight into many of the themes that come up in Olga's correspondence as it's published in the book that we're launching today. So the themes include sophistication of international travel, the enticing allure of a foreign landscape, the adventure of archaeology, if you like, very common trope, the bustle of excavations, the discovery of artifacts, and the exposure to new communities, new cultures, and crafts. And underpinning all of this, obviously, is the fact that this is a colonial context in which this work is being done. Olga appears on camera quite regularly. So in Lachish, City of Judah, which is this official film, we see her at work in the eye hospital. preparing drawings of scarabs, even thanks to Wendy Slaninka's recent identification, excavating and conserving animal bones with hot wax. This is the formal vision of the excavation, with title cards that give a bit of narrative structure. And you can see in one of the films on the links that are being shared with you, the title, an example of the title card. No one's name is mentioned specifically in the title cards in the film, but Olga is most definitely on display. Harding's home movies, however, give us a slightly rawer, more unmanicured vision of work and life in Mandate Palestine, though obviously most of the sequences were probably also to a certain extent staged, and this is more obvious in some cases than others. So, for example, one short film shows Olga participating with James Leslie Starkey in the selection of workers who are seated on the ground as she and Starkey stand over them. In another, Olga, Lancaster Harding, and James Starkey each take turns to pose artistically in the sunlight. We also see some of the amusements, if you like. One memorable sequence, which was filmed intentionally backwards, shows Olga and an as yet unidentified man having a drink and a banana inside one of the excavated chambers, most likely at Teletheweird, but we're not sure. At the end of the scene, they leap backwards out of the room to the ground surface. The films we digitized were silent. Olga's correspondence, which is now available thanks to Jack and Roz's efforts in a manner that is probably, that is definitely not, hasn't been available to date, gives us a soundtrack to the films, Olga's voice and her experiences. So maybe someday the two can come together. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for those introductions. I'm now going to invite Jack Green to share his presentation. So Jack, please tell us about the book and Olga Tufnell's letters.
Great, thank you, Carol. It's really wonderful to be here. I am so excited about this book launch event, and it's wonderful to be able to share this with you today. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of myself and also Ros Henry. We want to thank the organizers of the webinar, book launch, the CBRL, the PEF, especially Carol, of course, and Felicity, as well as Alison Fox of UCL Press, and also our discussant, of course, we just heard from Amara Thornton. We're looking forward to having more discussion later. We also want to thank everyone who helped with the publication and the research of this book, and a lot of that was the Palestine Exploration Fund as well, but not only, many others, including the British Museum and many other institutions, and actually they're acknowledged in the book, and also at the end of this presentation, there's almost too many to mention. But I thank all of them, we thank all of them for this, for bringing this to fruition. So in this short presentation, I'm going to be presenting an overview of the book and of Olga Tufnell. Ros, as mentioned before, will be, she's here, but she'll be able to answer questions in the Q&A. So what I'd like to do in this overview is not only give a sense of the book and an overview of Olga Tufnell, but also a little bit about how the book developed, and as well as providing opportunities to show how the book can be used by researchers and others who are not necessarily archaeologists. Many people interested in social history, history of Mandate period Palestine. There's actually a wide range of areas that this book can also speak to. But first, let's introduce Olga Tufnell to you here. And I'll preface this by just adding that we, in the book and also in this presentation, I'll be alternating between the use of Olga Tufnell as a full title, but also just Olga sometimes too. And there's a reason for that, because really throughout the whole process of doing this book and researching and reading the letters, she signed all of her letters to her mother, just Olga. And I think that Ros and I, we both have kind of, in a way, got to know Olga through the letters. Ros knew her, of course, herself. And so it's an attempt to also be a bit more personal. It's not to diminish in any way Olga Tufnell as an academic or a researcher. It's just simply from a personal point of view. She was an archaeologist, Olga Tufnell. She was born in 1905. She died in 1985, and she's familiar to many of you who are archaeologists, of course, because of the publications she stewarded through and edited, the Lachish or Lachish, depending on how you pronounce it, the volumes from the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, and also the Foss Temple. So she was a key person in the excavations, but also in these publications. And I think anyone who's used these publications from Teletheweird will know how useful they still are even today after 70 years. And it's really testament to her scholarship, her patience, her dedication, and her thoughtfulness in terms of preparing the kinds of information she's preparing. And really the information in these volumes have stood the test of time. It's kind of it was certainly a type site back in the 50s when this was published, but it still continues to be a type site today for the archaeologists who are working there in the region. So I think that's how many people are known to Olga. But you will also, so just to also show you a little bit about her background, how did she get to that point, being an archaeologist and working in the Levant and in Palestine at that time? Well, as I said, she was born in 1905 into, I would say, privileged surroundings. You can see here the Tufnell family at Langley's in 1911. And Langley's is was the Tufnell family estate in Great Waltham, Essex, and it was the home of Olga's grandparents. She's actually in this photograph in the vehicle on the left-hand side, aged about 6 years old. And so she came from a prosperous and influential family in England, and she went on to really, how did she go on from here to become an archaeologist? She basically, she was educated both in England and also in Belgium before the First World War, but in her examination, she failed mathematics, and that actually could have led to her not pursuing an academic career sort of after that, or going on to further studies. And then she went on to study art at an English-Italian school in Florence as an older teen. And on her return, and this was now in post-World War I Britain, she didn't follow a sort of conventional life. She didn't marry at that time or later in her life, and she didn't follow a conventional career but this had a kind of silver lining for her, because she was able to pursue her interests, travel, and have a pretty independent life. So there are lots of new opportunities. We'll be moving on to that in a moment. But I just want to also highlight here some of a range of photographs in different kind of settings, including filming antiquity, of course, that Amara mentioned as well. And I encourage you to go to the website and see those videos. But how did Olga, as someone without that formal training or university degree, get into archaeology? This was a time when it was becoming increasingly professionalized, and then she ended up really making a lifetime of research out of this. So we'll take a look at the letters, and we'll take a look at the story of this period of about 10 years, which were really formational for her. And we want to look at the archives themselves. And I show here on the left the Palestine Exploration Fund sort of summary of the archives. And you can see here that the period of these letters that this book is about 10 years. And so it's only really part of the archive. As Felicity mentioned, John McDermott has exhaustively listed and catalogued all of the letters right up until her death. So we have, there's a huge archive at the PEF. I encourage you to go and see those. But also there are related archives. There's the Wellcome Masternet Archaeological Research Expedition Archive at the British Museum, UCL, the Petrie Museum, and also the Institute of Archaeology has related archives. The Wellcome Trust, or Wellcome Collection, as it is now, Egypt Exploration Society, and others, as well as the Starkey Family Archive as well. So there's a whole range of resources here. And just to show you some of these letters, this is also part of the challenge. You can see here, here's a handwritten letter on the left, and here's one of the typed letters on the right. And it's interesting to note that, as Felicity mentioned, Heather Bell had a lot to do with this in terms of bringing these eventually to them coming to the PEF. But also Roz has played a really key role here, because it was Roz who knew Olga personally from her time from 1955, when she first walked into the Institute of Archaeology, and she met Olga, became ended up working as an assistant for her, proofreading and also piecing together sherds from the site of Teletheweird to help towards the publication. And it was later on, at the time of Olga's death, Roz had co-written an obituary, and then subsequently became interested in doing something with the letters to make them available. And Jonathan Tubb, then at the British Museum, also the PEF, played a key role in making those letters accessible to Roz so she could use them, she could work on them. And she did a lot to transcribe and also to order these into the correct sequence, because it's often difficult knowing which dates they are sometimes. They don't always have the year on them. You can also see the handwriting is challenging. And that's actually occupied a lot of our time, both Roz and I, trying to work out what some words mean. So it was in 2007 that I met Roz for the first time when I was studying and researching in the British Museum, working with Jonathan Tubb. And I was introduced to her, and it was mentioned, would you like to be involved in some way in helping this project to, become a book, or to edit these letters, provide some context, some archaeological context to the letters? I said, sure, that would be great. Well, here we are. It's many years later, we've got there finally. And I have to say thank you as well to Carly Crouch, who was the publications committee chair for the PEF, for making also the suggestion to reach out to UCL Press, who have done a great job to bring this book to fruition. So the letters themselves, they really shed light on the archaeological arena during the British mandate in Palestine in the 20s and 30s. This is often described, has been described as a sort of golden age of biblical archaeology. And this is when important discoveries were being made with new scientific methods. And also there was a large amount of funding available from donors, and also a relatively, it was relatively inexpensive in terms of hiring local workers to work on these projects too. So this combined to the ability to do these projects on a pretty large scale. So other major projects that were going on at the time included the Department of Antiquities in Palestine, the University of Pennsylvania at Beth Shan, the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem, Jericho, PEF, and the Harvard University with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Samaria, and the University of Chicago at Megiddo, to name a few. And of course, there were the Flinders Petrie digs, as well as Teletheweird, which we'll get onto in a moment. Yet this sort of golden age portrayal, it does, it's dominated by Anglo-American projects, and it's often idealized, and it neglects this social and political challenges and tensions at play in this period, especially the turbulent setting of the Arab Revolt in the late 1930s, as well as inequalities between foreign archaeologists and local workforces. So the archives, they shed some light on the people who worked and spent time with each other across this very big social, political divide, and across different social spheres, what they did on their days off, how their attitudes, experiences, and practices shaped archaeological knowledge. as well as their part, the part that they played in colonial and imperial structures within society. And the archives also provide insights into biographical networks. And so through some of these photographs, the captions, the letters, you can actually identify individuals, not just the foreign archaeologists that you see here on the left, like Lancaster Harding, Mrs. Petrie, Lady Petrie, Starkey, Risdon, but also the workers on these projects too. And there needs to be more work to kind of get more information about the workers and who they were and how they contributed to the archaeology of this time too. The letters also give us a lot of information about travel and also tourism. And this is really interesting because they give us, we have photographs, but also it tells us about how people traveled at that time before planes and how they traveled around the region of the Middle East and the East Mediterranean. Have some fantastic photographs from all these travels from all over, from Cyprus, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Turkey, and as well as Palestine. Also, there's the Diabolical Strength, which was an overland car journey, which is one of the chapters in the book. It's also the topic of a book by H.H. McWilliams called The Diabolical Strength. It's an overland journey all the way from Jerusalem to London. And it's quite hair-raising, and there's a lot of really interesting insights into how people travel. You can see some images of the vehicle here, and I urge you to take a look at the book. It's very, very entertaining. But now let's turn back to Olga and her, how she got into archaeology, some social relationships. We really have to think of Olga as a Petrie pup. And that was someone who had worked, basically being trained by and had become a kind of mentee of Flinders Petrie, but also Hilda's Petrie too. So Flinders and Hilda Petrie, Flinders Petrie being the Egyptian archaeologist at UCL at that time, and also Hilda Petrie, who was an archaeologist in her own right as well. And they worked together on these projects. And also they managed the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem. So it was actually Flinders Petrie and Hilda Petrie who gave Olga the first opportunity. It was Olga's mother, Blanche Tufnell, was a family friend and good friend of Hilda Petrie. And when it was time for Olga to find a job and find something to do, she got the opportunity to help out with one of the summer exhibitions that they were organizing in London. And after that, she became the assistant secretary at the British School of Archaeology in Jerusalem, so answering the phone, soliciting donations, and helping out with the objects as well. It took about 5 years before she got invited, or she accepted, don't know which way round it was, to go with Petrie to Egypt for the first time in 1927. And so there she became inaugurated as a Petrie pup. And there's an article by Olga about her reminiscences in the PEQ, the quarterly of the Palestine Exploration Fund. It was probably Olga's artistic skills that may have led her to Khao el-Kabir in Egypt. So she went there for a short season in late 1927 to make copies of the wall paintings in these tombs in Middle Egypt. And she went with Myrtle Broom, who may be known to some of you as well in Egyptology. She's got some really vivid accounts from this time. It's her first time in the Middle East and in North Africa. She's really excited. She's writing a lot of detail about what's going on. So if you want to find out more, please do read the letters. She then went immediately on that Christmas to Telfara South, or Telfara as it's more commonly referred to in southern Palestine. And she joined the team there, and you can see some of the team members in this photograph here. And she was learning really quickly here at this point in terms of how to manage the workers that she was now responsible for. And I quote one of these letters. She writes, "Work is in full swing, and I'm out on the cemetery all day. We have now 47 skulls, and I'm waiting for more to turn up to complete the round 50. There are 2 kuftis and about 50 men and boys on my beat. My job is to keep the boys at it and to record anything that turns up and be on the spot generally. The Arabic moves on now that I hear little else all day, and I have to try to make myself understood. You should have seen me sacking a boy yesterday. Nobody was more surprised than myself. It was a fine sight. The men are very good workers and really reliable. And Mr. S. Starkey does the rounds frequently. The day is pretty full up. We come in for lunch at 12 till 1 and then carry on till sunset. After that, there's drawing to be done and general clearing up until bedtime. So a pretty full day, I would say. We're not sure why she took a break in the season here, but in 1929, she went on to Cyprus, where she was volunteering for the Cyprus Museum and the Swedish Cyprus exhibition, and she was doing watercolors and illustrations for objects in the museum. She spent much of that time also visiting archaeological sites and taking photographs and also documenting ethnographic aspects of life in Cyprus, especially weaving and also pottery making as well. And she's got these fantastic photographs from Kornos, which she visited with Joan Duplat Taylor, who was emerging in Cypriot archaeology at that time, another British archaeologist associated with the Institute of Archaeology. And it's still an important place today for the study of the ethnography of pottery making. And after Cyprus, she went on to Tel Ajjul with the Petries for a couple of seasons. And I just want to add here that there's actually not a huge amount in the letters that really talk about the archaeology. We have to tease that out in the introductory material. But this was really a time of Flinders Petrie's interest in Egypt over the border in Palestine. He couldn't work in Egypt anymore, which is why he went there. And he was really interested in the Hyksos, or in the second intermediate period. So the first half of the second millennium BC. And you can see a picture of one of the Equid burials that Olga Tufnell had a hand in excavating. There's also settlement remains from there as well. So this was a really important site archaeologically. But it's worth mentioning here the archaeological labor aspect at this point. And I mentioned the Kuftis in Olga's letter before. And it's really important to understand the huge amount of work that was involved here. And the Kuftis were Egyptian workers who'd been trained under Petrie, and almost in a sort of hereditary way. It's often the sons of other workers who'd ended up working for him as well. And he brought groups of Kuftis with him from the village of Kuft in Egypt to Palestine to work on the excavations as well. And they stayed with him throughout. And at this point, it's also worth mentioning the importance of archaeological labor. They were foremen largely, and they were more skilled archaeologists in a sense, having a lot of experience with mud brick. So they had skills that they were adding here. But it's worth reading on this topic of archaeological labor, the work of Alison Mickle, also Rachel Sparks on Petrie's excavations, and also Wendy Doyon for further research on the Kuftis in the Levant beyond Egypt. It's also worth considering the local Palestinian workers who were there alongside, and they included men, women, and children, both from the local villages, the Fellaheen, as well as semi-nomadic Bedouin, who would camp near the site and conduct work there. As with most excavations, most work was done by gangs of men, diggers who filled the baskets, and then often children who carried the baskets, and women and children also sieved for fines. They weren't paid a huge amount. Workmen were paid 2 shillings a day, which is about £7 today in sterling, and children were paid 1 shilling. And so I'll move on at this point, but it's important to also note that the label was not only used for archaeology, but also for digging canals, such as this image on the right, which is digging a canal to flush out the malarial mosquitoes. So this was a public health mission as well as being an archaeological mission. So it's about that intersection, which we'll come to again in a moment. So after much deliberation, Olga made the hard choice to leave the Petries in 1932 to join her friends and colleagues who decided to make a break for it and start a new project at Teletheweird, which is ancient Lachish or Lachish. James Leslie Starkey was the director, and Lancaster Harding, Ralph Richmond Brown, Colt, Harris Dunscombe Colt, and Olga all went at the same time. The site was already thought to be biblical Lachish at that time by Albright and Garstang, although Petrie had favoured Tel Hesse as Lachish or Lachish. Duweir was also being compared at that time with Sennacherib's Siege of Lachish relief, which is in the British Museum, and it's easy to see why with its imposing scale. This expedition was to last 6 seasons and cover important findings, including a late Bronze Age Canaanite temple, New Kingdom shrine, Persian period residency, Medi tombs, evidence of Assyrian and Babylonian destructions, as well as the famous Lachish letters, which provided insights into the organization of the defenses of Kingdom of Judah and on the eve of its destruction by the Babylonians. Many scarab seals were found as well, and this became a major focus of Olga's research in later years. The findings at Lachish were also very important in terms of biblical connections and public archaeology. Financial supporters, including Sir Charles Marston, went on to write popular books using findings from Lachish to help prove the veracity of the Bible. An important part of was camp life, and the camp was organized on the Petrie model, including long, low mud brick and stone buildings around a courtyard. They had mixed camp, which is a practice that was frowned upon by the contemporary American archaeologist, W.F. Albright. He had kept the sexes apart unless they were married. And it's worth noting that also Dorothy Garrod around this time was conducting the first female-only dig at the Carmel Caves. And other British-led projects were not so prudish or didn't have so much of a problem with women, whether they were married or unmarried, participating in these excavations. Also, you see here on the bottom left, Hubda and Aisha, who helped with a lot of the domestic needs within the camp as well. And clearly one of the most important elements of a successful expedition is the keeping of good local relations. And Olga's letters allude to what appeared to be largely peaceful interactions that included visits to the homes of village leaders, invitations to dinner, attendance of events. And one of Olga's letters of 1933 does refer to disputes between the expedition and the local landowners over the use of agricultural land on and around the Tell. And this included the location of the dig camp itself. We'll return to that in a moment. But one of the other really important, there are other fun activities, of course, as well, fancy dress parties. There's also John Starkey, you can see here on the top right. And John, if you're joining us from Canada, hello. I hope you are. I hope you're well. But this is John Starkey as a young boy who grew up on the digs. And when he was had 2 nannies there, and he actually spoke more Arabic than he did English for much of that time. So there's also, of course, documenting traditions and lifestyles. Olga was very keen on learning about ornamentation, personal dress and costume elements, and she took photographs and made sketches, and also collected objects and items, some of which are now in the British Museum. In addition to the archaeological responsibilities at Teletheweird, as well as earlier on at Telfara and also Ajjul, she made a major contribution in terms of the clinic and also what was also known as the Eye Hospital. She wrote letters to Dr. John Strathern of the Eye Hospital in Jerusalem, and she talked about undertaking training there. And this really shows her commitment to helping local people, assisting with their health needs. She writes that she could sometimes serve or treat 30 to 40 people a day, Many people who came had eye diseases. Malaria was a much more common ailment in the coastal plain area where they'd been before. Conjunctivitis, trachoma, these are common eye complaints, infections. So given the numbers that we're dealing with here, the clinic must have filled a really important gap in terms of public health in this more rural area. People were coming from a long way. So this must have had a very positive impact on the local community. And it's really this intersection between humanitarianism and archaeology, which I think is interesting and I think should be explored further in the history of archaeology. I don't think it's been covered very much. Moving on to a more traumatic event and topic, a series of articles in the Palestine Exploration Quarterly have delved into the tragic murder of the director of the Teletheweird expedition, James Leslie Starkey, in 1938. Starkey was shot near Hebron by armed robbers or insurgents who ambushed his car on the way to Jerusalem, where he was going to attend the opening of the Palestine Archaeological Museum. The commonly accepted narrative, as also relayed by the driver, as well as his son, John Starkey, is that he was mistaken for being Jewish on account of his long beard and murdered in cold blood by an Arab brigand. And I use that in air quotes, it's a quote. Yossi Garfinkel has recently theorized that it could have been a revenge killing ordered by an aggrieved landowner at Kobeba, whereas David Usishkin has countered this theory, and he reads detailed police reports at this time. So these articles about Starkey's murder, as well as also the recent book by Billy Melman, Empires of Antiquities, or Empire of Antiquities, presents further evidence of this criminal act that occurred over 80 years ago now. And so while Ros and I, we don't personally follow the grudge theory, there were certainly tensions that existed between Starkey, the dig, and the local people there. But as I hope I've shown in this presentation, there were positive relations between the local community and the expedition that need to be taken into account. These relations were not always harmonious, but I think that overall, we must say that they were mostly positive. While work continued for the rest of the season, the loss of Starkey and the ongoing deterioration in terms of security meant it was time to depart. There are a few reports about the condition of the site after the expedition left and during World War II. And it's worth noting that what happened to the village of Kobeba and its population of several hundred people, they had to leave in 1948 at the time of Israel's War of Independence, also known as the Palestinian Nakba. There was armed action that led to the defeat of Egyptian forces, and a number of buildings and property was destroyed in Kobeba. I've often wondered about what happened to the descendants of the village, where they might be today. It would be really interesting to hear if anyone knows of anyone today who is a descendant of someone who can identify people in the photographs. And several years later, in the mid-1950s, Moshav, an agricultural settlement, was established adjacent to the site of the village of Kobeba, where it remains today. And the archaeological site is now part of the national parks of Israel. The site has been under periodic re-excavation from the late 60s until the present day. And I shared this photograph here taken in 1983 when Olga Tufnell visited the Tel Aviv University Lachish expedition in Israel as the guest of director David Usishkin, where she shared her reminiscences with about 200 people. And I recommend David's book, 2014, on biblical Lachish for more information on the history of excavations there. Alongside others, Olga devoted many years in processing the excavation finds, and after World War II, completing the volumes for Teletheweird for the Wellcome Trust, she carried out a number of activities, as Felicity mentioned, PEF centenary exhibits, lecture tours, excavating at Nimrud, researching scarab seals with William Ward, which focused on chronology in the East Mediterranean. She never took on a formal academic job. She was awarded a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries title, but it appears that she never really pursued an academic career. Perhaps she was happy to be independent and do her own thing. We should really also think about Olga in terms of other women archaeologists at this time, particularly British women archaeologists, and talk about Dorothy Garrard, Gertrude Caton Thompson, Kathleen Kenyon, etc. So it's good to consider Olga alongside these other well-known contributors to archaeology in the region, in the Levant. But it's also interesting to note, I mentioned W.F. Albright earlier, and also there was an article in 2019 by Jenny Abeling wondering why is it there weren't many women in biblical archaeology until fairly recently. And I think that's an interesting thing to look at and see what are the differences between, say, the British situation and the situation in the United States. So I think that could be interesting. And I urge you to also follow the website of Trailblazers for more information on these women archaeologists. So what were the factors in play with Olga's archaeological career? Well, family and personal networks played a pretty key role, as we saw. The letters are a veritable who's who. She was very well networked, and she also had family members who were in high places, who were quite influential. Her uncle was an admiral in the British Navy. He was also stationed in Haifa at some points. So there was a lot of networking that was going on. She had that intersection as well with the humanitarianism, which I think is really important to consider. And of course, we have to also think about the cultural and political setting and the colonial aspects as well. She had high-level connections. I mentioned her cousin, sorry, not her uncle, her cousin, who was an admiral in the British Navy. She was able to meet with Sir Ronald Storrs in Nicosia in Cyprus, who was the governor at that point, through those connections. She also knew people like in the Palestine police force. She was interested in Jerusalem social happenings. She attended many events. It was a cosmopolitan, politically charged world. She was interacting with members of Arab and Jewish communities alongside colonial and expat residents. There are many other aspects that I could mention, but I urge you to read the book and also to explore the Palestine Exploration Fund archive, the Olga Tufnell archive. And I thank everyone for all their contributions to help with this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, for that thorough and very interesting presentation on the book. Congratulations on the book, and to say that PDF of the book is available free to download from the UCL Press's website. We'll share that link, I'm sure, in a moment. And I would like to now invite Amara to ask the first question, please, and of Ros Henry, who knew Olga Tufnell personally. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol. So yes, Ros, please give us the benefit of your memories of Olga to kind of pull us into the personal aspect for you of editing this collection.
Oh, hello, Amara. Of course, I found Olga a really marvelous employer, very kind, very patient, and a very nice person. I walked into the institute not knowing anybody, trying to find employment there, because I was interested in the subject and wanted to know further. And Olga needed an assistant, so that was brilliant. So I was set to work by her immediately on all sorts of interesting things, including processing a great number of bowls from the Foss Temple and all sorts of other things as well. Yes, I found her very nice to work for. And I found that she was very much respected by everybody else, and she always had a lot of visitors, colleagues, students, all asking her advice and talking to her. Her office was always very busy with people. When visitors came, I used to scurry off down to the basement and get busy with the bowls of the Post Temple again, and all that sort of thing. Trying to remember who she had. Somebody, Barnett from the British Museum came a lot, and I think I remember Torchiner coming, but I may be mistaken, but I think I do. Yes, she was altogether a very nice person to work for, very kind to me, very considerate. When I developed a rash on my arms from scrubbing sherds in strong detergent, she sent me to Casualty immediately to see about it. And when she went to America on her lecture tour, she brought me back a really nice piece of costume jewelry with sort of golden pearls and things. So she was an absolutely wonderful person to work for. And I admired her greatly and was very sorry when she retired and my work for her came to an end. And the work that we'd done together on Lachish 4 was published, and that was the end of that. So I do remember her with great affection. And I would also like to mention that I had a lot of help with Olga's background from her relative Sarah Micklem, who told me a great many things about Olga's early life and the family, and invited me to stay at Langley's, and which gave me a great insight into Olga's early life and background. And also Olga's great niece, Kathy Warwick, who came to see me and brought her a lot of photographs that you see, and some very interesting letters that Olga wrote to her grandmother, describing her work for the Petries in London at the exhibitions. So I got to know Olga a bit further through all those things, as well as knowing her when I worked for her. When she retired, I didn't see very much of her, but I came to her last lecture in London at the Antiquaries. And I think that was the last lecture she ever gave. And she was just the same Olga. Obviously older, a bit bent, but just the same sparkling wit and intelligence that she always had. And I was so, pleased to have worked for her. And I'm so thrilled that this book of her letters has been published, because I think they're a very important addition to her life. And I'm very grateful to everybody who's helped to make this possible, including, of course, Jack, who has just been wonderful to work with. And I'm grateful thanks to him too, and indeed to everybody else. That's
you too, Ros. It's been a pleasure.
Lovely to hear about what it was. So I was going to also invite Felicity to ask the first question before opening up to our audience as well.
Thank you, Carol. My question is for Jack, and it's about Olga and her relationship with the local villagers and the workforce at Teletheweird and her other sites. What kind of impression do you get of how Olga fitted in with the local culture?
Thanks, Felicity. That's a really great question. And I think it developed over time. I think that the relationship she had at the at Telfara, for example, and then Tell Ajjul maybe weren't quite as long lasting. There were a few people who came from those digs who joined the team at Teletheweird as well. So she continued those relationships. So there were some continued relationships with both some of the Egyptian workers, for example, Mohammed al-Krati, Ottoman al-Krati, who was the cook. So they sort of snagged him from the peat trees in a way, but also meant some of the Bedouin workers as well, because they were more mobile. They could come closer and camp near to the site. So there was definitely a continuation. Now the relationships, I think that she was getting to know Arabic, and so she was beginning to understand, and certainly with Harding, Lancaster Harding, they used to go and have Arabic lessons, and so they could get more familiar and become more conversant with the workers until they were more comfortable. And so I think that she had a different relationship perhaps with the male workers that she's on the dig with all the time, compared to maybe the women and the children. And I think she's spending more time with the women and children in more of the clinical settings of the medical side of things. In her role with the clinic, for example, we know that she sometimes even assisted with maternity, even though she wasn't trained in this at all. You know, someone's having trouble giving birth, get Olga, she'll manage to resolve it. So she shows up, and lo and behold, the woman gives birth. So she didn't claim any credit for this, but it's that kind of thing of she began to have closer relationships, I think, because of that that aspect of the medical side. And she would take some of the women to Jerusalem as well from the village. And so there's some interesting accounts of that as well. So I think she got on well with everyone I think she pretty much got on well with everyone. She was much loved, and she really enjoyed being with those people as well.
So please do put your questions in the chat. We've all got lots of questions, so ourselves, but we would like to open this out. We've got until 5:30 UK time, so please put your questions in the chat. Anything you would like to ask about the collections at the PF or at UCL, the book itself, and also of our editors and people who knew Olga Tufnell here. So Amara, would you like to ask another question, or
Sure.
Felicity? Yes.
I wondered, just following on, Roz, from what you said, whether you think Olga Tufnell would be pleased that her letters are being published today.
Oh, Amara, I think she would be thrilled. Actually, I did wonder whether she may have intended them to be published, because they are so very vivid and spontaneous, but also quite considered in a way. And as the first lot were typed, I just wonder, when I came to read them, whether she ever intended them to be published. Maybe she, or even form some sort of diary. I don't know, but I think she'd be very pleased that they were. Absolutely, yes.
I'd love to add to that, if I may.
Please.
One of the things about the letters, especially the earlier ones, I think actually all the way through, because she was writing them to many of them to her mother, and her mother was most likely reading them out to family and friends. And so you actually see in some of the letters where it says not for sharing, you know. So there would be a little bit where it would say, please don't read this out, basically, or share this with anyone else. So I think you can imagine these are being read out. So there's a dialogue here, there's a narrative that's perhaps intended.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I ask both of you, having worked on these letters so closely and intimately, do you both have a favourite letter?
Well, I have a favourite letter. It's the one where Olga and Harding, and possibly others as well, go to Jerusalem on Christmas Eve, I think it was, to the Petrie's house where they were actually staying at that time, and started to sing carols outside. And Hilda Petrie comes out in her pajamas and tells them to go away in no uncertain terms. And that to me illustrates how Olga found Hilda Petrie's lack of sense of humour rather, well, she didn't really like it because she herself has such a sense of humour. And she writes this letter in such a way that you can't help laughing to see it all happening, you know, so vivid.
Thank
Sure,
you.
Jack has a favourite letter.
Yeah, there's one, I'm just trying to pull it up so I can actually quote it, but it's related to Olga's mother stays in the camp for a period of time, and there's a period where we don't have any letters at all because her mother's there, so why would she need to tell her? So there's a letter here where she's writing to her mother and saying, oh, did I tell you that Mohammed El-Kreti, that's the cook, asked very tenderly after you and said that he was in an awful dither when you came into the kitchen at Ajjul one day to ask him how the very delicious soup was made. The MP, that is Lady Petrie, I presume Madam Petrie, was with you, and he dared not divulge the disgraceful fact that there were onions in the soup. And yet he was terrified that you would guess it. You know, onions are an anathema in a Petrie camp, and yet Prof always comments on the excellence of the soup when it is particularly full of the noxious stuff.
Fantastic, thank you.
So I've got another question for both of you, and that is, I really liked the fact that you included some of the drafts of articles that Olga was writing for newspapers, and I wondered if you could say a little bit more about her working on these sort of like public reports, if you like, of what's going on site, and you know, yeah, what her role in sort of popularizing the archaeology for newspapers was.
I think I'll let Jack answer this one.
Okay. Yeah, so she did write some articles, and some of them were published. I was able to track down one or two of them, but I didn't have access to like a newspaper library at that time, so I only checked a few of them to see how they were actually published. And I think one of the really interesting ones, I think there was an American newspaper. She wrote a draft article for I think it was Tell Ajjul, and so she did this really as a favor for Petrie, I guess, for Philinda's Petrie or the Petries. But I don't know if she was paid. I think she did get paid for some of the articles that she wrote. But what was interesting in one of them, I know that she writes that part of her text was used in the article, but then her name is not actually cited at all. So she's, I think about half of the article is actually her words, but she's not given a credit. So that was, I think, one of the American newspapers, and maybe it was the Herald, or I'm not sure, Herald and Tribune. So there were, she did write very well. She wrote for a popular audience, and she knew the kind of audience. She played up the biblical side of things. She evoked ideas of dusty archaeological sites with potsherds scattered around. But then she would also evoke biblical scenarios and biblical characters and saying, imagine if so-and-so, I don't know, Joseph was here, or, you know, these different, or Jacob, or, you know, she would evoke these biblical figures as well in her articles and letters.
Thank you. Felicity, do you have a...
Yeah, I do. I was wondering about Olga's enduring fascination with decorative motifs, everything from scarabs in a kind of archaeological context to you know, the jewelry and the headgear, the dress of the local women in particular, and where this starts. Where does this interest in decorative motifs and traditions begin, do you think?
I think, I don't know if Ros has anything on this. I think it was her artistic sort of flair and background. I mean, she studied art and painting in Florence, and it's surprising we don't have more. I don't know if there are more of her artistic works that are available. I wasn't able to find any, but maybe some people out there can find them. I think that perhaps once she came to Egypt, and also certainly she was extremely excited about ancient Egypt. When she visits there, the descriptions are really vivid, the bright colors, the wall paint, the tomb paintings, Tutankhamun's tomb. You know, she really does portray this in a very vivid way. She talks about the decoration of the tents as well, in near Telfara and Ajjul, and she's definitely paying attention to the fashion, the Palestinian costume, the dress and ornaments. And I think she was, I don't know where that really comes from, but she also she acquired some as well, and she acquired and even made some of her own costumes. So I think perhaps the ornaments were of great interest. I don't know, maybe it's just that artistic mentality also drew her to the scarabs and the seals with the patterns that they have. And she was a great pattern finder.
Yeah.
You know, she was being able to decipher these chronological connections between all these sites. And I think it started with the scarabs they found at Teletheweird, and she published, and she really continued this her whole life. She's always looking for these motifs. Yeah. And I think she just had that eye for it. You know, she was continually searching for those patterns. So that's a very archaeological kind of mind, I think.
I think so. I mean, you can see also in some of the later material from places like Aden and Iraq, there are drawings of, you know, jewelry, and also this interest in how things are made as well. You know, the potters in Cyprus, you know, who's doing the making, how are they doing it? It's a very, she's a mixture, isn't she, of that kind of ethnographic and archaeological mind, I think.
I'm sort of interested in the sort of relationship between people at the Institute of Archaeology at that time, if we can, and sort of the sort of scene there and how people interacted, both how sort of earlier in her life and then sort of later in her life, and the role of the Institute of Archaeology. If you can sort of comment on that.
Well, the institute, the old institute in Regent's Park, St John's Lodge, really more like a club than an institution, because it was very small. I mean, the small number of people comparatively, and people came and went, and everybody knew each other, and it was a very close-knit sort of thing, very unlike how things are today. So I do remember a lot of people there, because they all came and they all could talk to each other, they all talked to Olga, and occasionally they spoke to me, although I was obviously very junior, but that they were all terribly nice and that didn't seem to matter. So we had people like Shepherd Freer, along the corridor. And we had Kathleen Kenyon when she came back from Jericho. And we had Malouin, who came and went. And we had Zoino, who came and went. And we had, I'm trying to think hard of who else. Molly Cotton came and went. There were lots of students. Well, not so many actually. They're PhD students really. No undergraduates, of course. There was Crystal Bennett, who became a great friend, and Arnie Dajani, who became, I think he became Inspector of Antiquities in Jordan, if I remember. And we had Yegel Yadin, who came and talked to Olga a lot. They all came and talked to Olga a lot. Trying to think who else was there. Well, it was a very nice, close sort of community. Very enjoyable and altogether lovely. Very happy place really, as far as I remember. Oh, and of course, Olive Starkey, Starkey's sister, worked in the photographic department, because I didn't realize at the time who she was, because, you know, although I was busy proofreading Lachish 4, obviously, really, you know, I wasn't really terribly aware of who she was, which I regret now, of course, because, you know, could have asked her lots of questions. I can't really think of anybody else, but certainly a wonderful place to work in. Very unlike anywhere today, really. Excuse me.
Giving us a sense of the community. We've got some hands up. People are not putting questions in the chat, but we've got Michael MacDonald, who has put his hand up. I'm going to allow you to talk if you're willing to do that.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I don't seem to have been allowed to be seen. I don't know quite why, but anyway, I think there is a problem that we can't, the audience can't go on the chat. It's only the actual panel on the chat, which may be why you're not getting questions.
Okay, do you have a question?
I do.
Sorry about that.
I wondered if you could tell us something about her time in Aden, which must have been very interesting. Hello?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So, yeah, I have to admit that I have not looked at the letters from that time, but I am aware of them. And there's been someone who has actually studied them quite a bit, and I think was preparing them for publication, and has also presented on the topic of the letters from visits to Aden. Felicity, you remember the?
Yeah. Yes, I mean that's one of those projects that kind of emerged for a while and then disemerged.
It's Carl Phillips, yeah.
That's right.
Carl Phillips
Yeah.
has done quite a bit of research on this, but I'm not sure if I've seen much that's been published.
No.
But,
no, because I think she went at the same time as Lancaster Harding when he was asked to go and set up the museum in Aden, and I suspect that she went at the same time. But what else she did there, I don't know.
I know that she was really interested in the pottery, and she did document pottery production. I remember that from Carl Phillips' lecture. Also, I don't know if there was a connection that she visited, but Charles Ing, who was on the dig with them at Teletheweird, he was actually an intelligence officer who was working in Aden in the 1960s, and I believe, I don't know anything about what he was doing there, but it's possible that they may have also met at that time if he was based there.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll shut up now. You can mute.
Thank you, Michael. We do apologise. We had enabled the chat, and we do apologise that people don't appear to have been able to put questions in. But we would like to thank Jack, and oh, we've got another hand up. So, and Roz and our discussants here. We have Martin Worthington, who I'm going to allow to talk too. Have I got the right one? Okay.
Hello, am I now audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I had a question for Roz, which is, I love this idea of walking into the Institute without knowing anybody and coming out as an assistant. That must have been quite a first meeting. So I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about it. Thank you.
Well, what can I tell you? That's just really what happened. I'd got a slight connection with the fact that my aunt had dug at Roxeter with Kathleen Kenyon, and when I was talking to her about how I wanted to do some more about learning about Palestinian archaeology without actually being a student, because I felt I couldn't really go on being a student anymore. She suggested I talk to Miss Kenyon, she was then, and I went looking for her at the Institute, but she was actually away at Jericho. And so I met Edward Piddock, the secretary, in the hall and explained to him what I was doing. And he said, oh, go up the stairs and knock on Miss Tufnell's door, which I did. And she hired me on the spot. So that was really how it was. It was a complete chance, really. And I'd just come down from university. I mean, I didn't know anything at all about archaeology, but I was interested to know more. And I seemed to fit what she wanted doing. And we got on very well. Well, I like to think we did anyway. And that's how it happened. And it was a terribly lucky chance for me, because after I finished working for her when she retired from the Institute, well, really from the Wellcome Trust, actually, but gave up being at the Institute, she sort of handed me on to Kathleen Kenyon, which was an altogether alarming experience and quite different, but also very enjoyable in a strange sort of way.
It was a very different time and a smaller community, very clearly.
A very different time, very small community. And in those far off days, you could sort of do what you wanted. I mean, there was no pressure, as it were. The world was your oyster in a way, as it's not at all like today.
Yes, has changed.
You could do anything you wanted. You could ask anybody. You could talk to anybody you wanted. I mean, in those, it was still quite rare actually for women to have been to university. In a way, I mean, there are only 2 colleges at Oxford that had women then. No, sorry, there were 5 actually. When I think about it, there were 5. Sorry, 5. And of course, none of the men's colleges admitted women. And universities in general were full up with ex-service people. It was quite, difficult to get in.
It's really remarkable, as Jack highlighted, the contribution of women in archaeology from this time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I never felt that it was strange to work for a woman or to be a woman, if you see what I mean.
That's good.
It didn't occur to me that that there was anything funny about it, And I think all my colleagues and friends thought the same. And we're rather astonished today at at how it's considered, how women are, it's a sort of feminine aspect of things today, we find rather strange, because we never thought anything about it. We thought it was okay just to do whatever you wanted.
Great, and travel and have the opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like.
So, sorry, go.
I was just, well, we're coming to the end of our time and today, and I would just like to thank everybody, especially Jack and yourself, Ross, for sharing your experience of Olga Tufnell. And I'd like to encourage people to check out the book, to check out the PDF if you're interested in seeing the archives. And also Amara Thornton has been doing wonderful work on filming in antiquity and with the archives at the Institute of Archaeology. So she has her own webpage, and if you'd like to reach out to her as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Carol, can I just say, it's thanks to Michael McDonald that the films were made available to us. So yeah, thank you, Michael.
Yes, yeah, these are, yes, yeah, okay, thank you, Michael. And it's great that you raised your hand so we could speak to you directly. So thank you very much, everybody, for all the presentations. It's been a pleasure to do this joint lecture. I'm sorry for the technical problems that we seem to have experienced, but thank you very much, and look out for more events both at the PF and the CBRL in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.